Imagine, five completely different groups of people watching a single man do the exact same things, say the exact same words, and they walk away with five mutually exclusive realities. Like
Right.
one group sees a savior, another sees a literal lunatic, another sees this massive political threat. And today, we're not talking about like modern cable news. We're looking at a 2,000-year-old text to see how human perception, personal agendas, and, deeply held biases completely shape our reality.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mirror for how we process things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a really fascinating set of sources for you. We've got a detailed audio sermon transcript alongside a set of highly analytical structural notes. And both of these focus on one specific ancient narrative. It's Mark chapter 3, verses 7 through 35. Our mission today is to use this ancient text as a case study for how we process information right now in our own lives.
Right. And before we really get into the weeds here, we should probably establish our parameters.
Definitely.
We aren't here to preach to you, and we certainly aren't here to endorse the specific theology of these sources. What we are doing is unpacking the incredibly rich historical, psychological, and sociological arguments this material presents. We're looking at these five distinct groups of people from the text as a mirror, reflecting how human beings construct their worldview when they're confronted with something paradigm shifting.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. Because before we even get to the massive crowds and the chaos, the source material forces us to look at the psychological state of the man at the center of it all. The notes open with this provocative thought experiment. They ask, if a doctor sat you down today and told you that you only had 1 year left to live, would you change your plans?
And, I mean, for almost anyone, the answer is a resounding yes.
Right, I know I would.
Yeah, you would drop your mundane routines, you'd probably panic, and you would frantically try to cram a lifetime of experiences into 12 months. Just a very basic human survival mechanism.
That makes perfect sense for a normal person, but the text throws a massive wrench in that logic. The sources point out that Jesus knew his public ministry was only going to last about 3 years. He knew, even at this really early stage in chapter 3, that people were already actively plotting his assassination.
Yeah, the tension is already there.
It is, and if I picture like a modern startup CEO who knows they only have a 3-year financial runway before the entire company folds, you usually see a culture of absolute desperation, late nights, frantic pivots, sweat. But here, the sources emphasize an unhurried, quiet approach. There is absolutely no panic, just a leader methodically executing a vision.
What's fascinating here is that quiet, methodical approach sits in stark contrast to the sheer logistical nightmare happening around him.
Oh yeah, the crowds.
Right, the sources really stress the geography here. We're talking about massive, desperate crowds walking up to 100 miles on foot. And they aren't just local villagers. They're coming from Idumea in the deep south, Judea, and all the way up to Tyre and Sidon in the north, which, by the way, are Gentile territories.
So this isn't just some localized Galilean phenomena.
Not at all. He is drawing tens of thousands of people across borders. This is a massive multinational crisis that threatens regional stability. I mean, the sheer weight of humanity pressing in on one person is staggering.
Which brings up a detail in the notes that I found just fascinating. Because of this crushing crowd, Jesus asks his followers to get a normal wooden fishing boat ready so he can push slightly off the shore and avoid being literally trampled to death.
Yeah, a very practical move.
But wait, why would someone with supposedly limitless power rely on a wooden boat? I mean, later in this exact same overarching narrative, he supposedly walks on water. So why not just perform a miracle right then and there to float above the crowd or, push them back with some invisible force?
Well, that tension is exactly what the source wants you to notice. It demonstrates a profound philosophical balance. The text is arguing that you don't use supernatural power as a cheap substitute for sensible, natural action. The source uses a brilliant analogy to explain this, actually. It says it's like a man whose house is currently on fire, and instead of grabbing a bucket of water or turning on the hose, he just stands in his front yard praying for rain.
Wow. Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
Right. True balance means engaging the practical, sensible solutions that are right in front of you before expecting the impossible.
I see the logic there for sure, but the sheer danger of being crushed by that crowd makes you wonder what was driving them. I mean, the risk was enormous. What did these thousands of people actually want from him? And this is where the sources identify our first specific group, which they call the multitude. And according to the text, they viewed him strictly through one lens. They saw him purely as a miracle worker.
Right, their primary overwhelming motivation was physical healing, and the source makes a very sharp, almost uncomfortable argument here. It states that physical health is actually not the most important thing in life.
Which really grates against our modern sensibilities, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The speaker emphasizes this deep tension between our physical needs, like bread, shelter, and bodily health, and our spiritual needs, like forgiveness and purpose. The theological argument presented is that if humans only require food and physical comfort to be whole, we are effectively just naked apes, or, just animals.
I have to push back on that hierarchy, though. I mean, it is incredibly easy to sit in a comfortable room in the 21st century and declare that spiritual needs matter more than physical ones.
Oh, for sure.
But put yourself in the shoes of someone in the first century. If you have just walked 100 miles on a dirt road, dragging a debilitating, painful disease with you, isn't physical healing exactly what you should care about? It feels almost cruel to fault them for wanting their bodies fixed.
That is an entirely valid critique, and it's a tension the source actually anticipates. To explain this, the expert in the transcript uses a D-Day concept.
Oh, okay, like the World War II invasion.
Exactly. The idea is that Jesus wasn't just setting up a rural health clinic to manage symptoms. In this specific theological framework, the world is fundamentally under the domain of Satan, its enemy territory. So the physical healings, those were just the beachhead. They were D-Day.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, the ultimate mission was absolute liberation of the whole person, body and soul. Treating only the physical ailments would be like winning a single battle on the beach, but losing the entire war.
Which ties directly into the demonic element of the text, something the sources lean into really heavily. They make a very firm distinction between mental illness and demonic possession, treating them as two entirely separate objective diagnoses.
Yes, they are very clear about that separation.
Right. And there's this bizarre moment in the text where these demons actually recognize Jesus. They start shouting, "You are the Son of God." But Jesus immediately silences them. If they are broadcasting his actual identity, why shut them up?
Simply put, they were the wrong messengers, and it was the wrong time. You do not want your public relations campaign run by the enemy camp.
Fair point.
And the source shares a highly visceral modern anecdote to illustrate just how seriously it takes this concept of spiritual warfare. It details a story of a Swiss farmer's son who was supposedly possessed. The minister's confrontation with this boy ultimately ended with the farmer's entire herd of pigs going absolutely berserk and killing each other.
Wait, literal pigs. That is incredibly intense.
It is. It's a terrifying reality from the source's perspective. And it highlights the strategy behind silencing the spirits. Jesus needed the public to understand his humanity before they were confronted with his divinity. He needed that realization to happen organically through teaching and relationship, not through the chaotic screaming of evil spirits.
But the sheer danger of being crushed made it obvious that managing this multitude just wasn't sustainable. He couldn't rely on a chaotic mob. He needed an infrastructure. He has a 3-year runway, remember?
Right, the clock is ticking.
Exactly. He has to ensure his mission survives him. So, he leaves the crushing crowd behind, retreats up a mountain, and establishes an inner circle. And this brings us to the second lens. This core group, the 12, didn't see a miracle worker, they saw the master.
And appointing exactly 12 disciples is a highly strategic, symbolic move. It intentionally echoes the 12 tribes of Israel, signaling to anyone paying attention that he is establishing an entirely new community. But what the source points out is the fascinating dual purpose of this group. It breaks down into 2 words: communion and commission.
Right, communion and commission.
Yeah, communion means simply being with him, learning his character. Commission means being sent out to do the actual work.
The linguistic breakdown in the notes here is fantastic, by the way. The word apostle literally translates to sent out. It shares the exact same root as the word missile and missionary. You are quite literally a projectile sent into the world.
I love that visual. And the source uses that dual purpose to warn against 2 major extremes we still see in religious or philosophical life today. On one hand, you have the cloistered cell, people who just study, meditate, and pray, but never actually engage the messy real world.
Right.
The source notes that salt is no use if it stays in the salt cellar. But on the other hand, you have pure, unrooted activism, people burning themselves out doing good deeds without any internal grounding, communion, or core philosophy to sustain them. You really need both the gathering in and the sending out.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The actual demographic makeup of this 12-person team. The source points out that they were incredibly diverse and completely ordinary. But you have the ultimate political powder keg in this group.
Oh, absolutely.
You have Matthew, a tax collector who actively collaborated with the occupying Roman government, breaking bread every single day with Simon the Zealot, who was an underground resistance fighter, actively trying to overthrow that exact same government. It's like forcing a far-left anarchist and a far-right authoritarian to live and work in the same tiny apartment. Plus, a detail that often gets overlooked, 5 of these 12 disciples were actually blood relatives of Jesus.
Yeah, that political tension between Matthew and Simon alone would be explosive. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is highlighting a profound sociological point. These disciples were not chosen because of their impressive resumes or their flawless theology.
Right, they were just ordinary guys.
Exactly. They were, as the source calls them, anybody's and everybody's. They were chosen purely for what they could be molded into. Their allegiance to the master had to entirely supersede their massive political, social, and even familial divides.
So the inner circle is getting on board building this new community. But while that's happening, people watching from the outside are looking at the exact same evidence. The healings, the crowds, the mountain retreat, and seeing something deeply alarming. This shifts us to our third and fourth lenses, the friends who saw a madman and the foes who saw a magician.
Let's start with the friends, because this is a fascinating psychological study. These were people who knew him from his youth in Nazareth, back when he was just the eldest son managing the family carpentry business. And the text says they thought he was beside himself. They actually thought he had a split personality or was schizophrenic.
Wow.
Yeah, they literally traveled to where he was to physically seize him and have him quietly put away for his own good.
And the source lists their reasons, which forces us to look at this sociologically. He was neglecting his health, he wasn't eating regular meals, and he had completely abandoned his trade. We have to remember the context of a first-century honor-shame culture here.
That's a huge piece of this.
It really is. For the eldest son to abandon the family business to become a wandering teacher isn't just a quirky career change. It threatens the family's economic survival and brings immense social shame on their village. Honestly, if your best friend suddenly quit their steady job, stopped eating, and started attracting massive, dangerous mobs of desperate people, wouldn't calling them mad be the most rational, loving response you could have?
This raises an important question, because it absolutely would be. From a purely secular, survival-oriented perspective, it looks entirely like mania. The source makes a brilliant cultural observation here about how society handles radical devotion. It notes that society is perfectly happy to accept religion, or really any strong philosophical stance, as long as it is kept in a tidy, compartmentalized little box.
Right, like keep it to Sunday mornings and don't let it interfere with the real world.
Precisely. The source even references a historical quote from an old British prime minister who complained that things were getting entirely out of hand when religion began interfering with a man's private life.
That's hilarious.
It is, and it parallels a moment where a Roman official tells the Apostle Paul that much learning has made you mad. The point is clear. Total, all-encompassing commitment to a cause is almost always viewed by the mainstream as madness.
But if his friends thought he was just tragically crazy, his foes took it to a much darker place. The religious scribes who came all the way down from Jerusalem formed our fourth group. They saw him as a magician, specifically a black magician.
Yeah, they couldn't deny the empirical evidence that he was casting out demons, but they accused him of using the power of Beelzebub, the prince of demons, to do it.
It's a masterclass in cynical interpretation, honestly. They take an objectively good outcome, people being freed from torment, and attribute it to ultimate evil.
And Jesus dismantles this with pure, airtight logic. He says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. It's an absurdity. Why would Satan liberate his own victims? If Satan is actively empowering someone to destroy demonic influence, then Satan's kingdom is committing suicide.
And this logical defense leads right into what is arguably the most terrifying psychological concept in the entire source material: the unforgivable sin, blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. People hear that phrase and usually assume it's about committing some horrific physical crime or breaking a massive taboo, but the source clarifies it has absolutely nothing to do with physical appetites or typical moral failures.
No, not at all. It is entirely psychological.
Yeah.
The source describes it as the act of deliberately, systematically brainwashing yourself. Think about a time you've doubled down on a bad decision just to avoid admitting you were wrong to a rival.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Now multiply that. This sin is when you look at something that is objectively good and you call it evil. You call black white and you call light darkness. And you do this so consistently and so stubbornly that you eventually obliterate the very boundary between them in your own mind.
You literally destroy your own moral compass.
You do. It's not a single lightning bolt mistake where God suddenly loses his temper. It is a progressive, willful self-destruction. The reason it is unforgivable isn't because heaven runs out of mercy. It's because the person has destroyed their own capacity to recognize truth. If you can't recognize truth, you have destroyed your own capacity to ever repent or ask for forgiveness.
That is just...
It is, though the source does offer a comforting caveat for the listener. If you are sitting around anxiously worrying that you might have committed the unforgivable sin, the very fact that you still have a functioning conscience about it is absolute proof that you haven't.
Okay, well, that is a relief. But the mechanism of that self-deception is still terrifying. All right, so far we've seen crowds wanting physical miracles, disciples finding a master to follow, friends seeing madness that needs curing, and foes seeing a dark magician. But what happens when the most intimate circle of all finally arrives on the scene? This brings us to our fifth and final group, the family. They see him simply as the brother.
And the scene the text paints here is incredibly vivid. Mary, his mother, and his biological half-brothers and sisters finally arrive at the house where he is teaching. But because of that massive crushing crowd we talked about earlier, they literally cannot get inside.
Where there's just a wall of people.
Yeah, so they stand outside and send a message through the crowd, basically saying, your family is here, come out to us.
So what does this all mean? I mean, his response completely upends the social order. He looks at the random crowd of people sitting around him, listening to him, and says, whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. He completely redefines the concept of family, prioritizing spiritual relationships over biological chromosomes.
It's a massive shift.
Put yourself in a first-century Middle Eastern mindset for a second. Your biological family was your identity. It was your safety net, your social standing, your entire world. To publicly declare that a room full of strangers is your true family would have been an absolute social scandal.
It was a huge scandal. But the source emphasizes that this wasn't a callous rejection of his earthly family. It was a vast expansion of the concept of family. And the historical resolution to this tension is really quite beautiful. We know he didn't abandon his physical family. The texts record that he made sure his mother was provided for as he was dying.
Right.
But the real shift happens later. The source points out a crucial missing detail. At the event of Pentecost, among the 120 core believers gathered together, Mary and his biological brothers were right there in the room. His brother James even became a major leader in the early church.
So they actually made the transition.
They did. They transitioned from merely relying on their biological relation to being full participants in this new, eternal spiritual family. The source applies this to the listener today by pointing out that earthly bonds, even the closest marriages, ultimately end at death. But spiritual bonds, united by a shared commitment to a higher objective truth, continue into eternity.
That's really powerful.
It is. This is the ultimate invitation of the text. Moving from being a passive observer in the multitude or a skeptical friend on the outside to becoming an active participant in the family inside the house.
What a profound journey. One man, one brief historical moment, but 5 completely different lenses shaping reality. You have the multitude seeing a miracle worker to fix their immediate physical pain. You have the 12 disciples seeing a master to learn from and follow. You have the lifelong friends seeing a madman who needs to be locked up for his own good. You have the religious foes seeing a magician working for the dark side. And finally, you have a radical redefinition of what it means to be a brother in a family.
It really forces you to look in the mirror and examine your own interpretive lenses.
It really does. And that brings us right back to you, listening to this deep dive. The sources make a compelling case that history doesn't really leave us the option to just pat this figure on the head and call him a nice moral teacher. The claims and the reactions are far too extreme for that middle ground. But zooming out to a broader level, looking at your own life right now, how are you filtering the information around you? Are you just showing up for the immediate benefits, like the massive crowd looking for a quick fix? Or are you willing to look for the deeper, sometimes much more difficult truth?
And if I can leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on that terrifying concept of the unforgivable sin we talked about earlier.
Yeah, please do.
If the ultimate danger to the human mind is brainwashing yourself to see absolute good as absolute evil and completely obliterating the boundary between light and darkness, what does that mean for our modern algorithm-driven echo chambers here in 2026?
Oh man, that is a heavy question.
Think about it. Are our highly personalized, engagement-driven social media feeds actively training us to do exactly this? Are they subtly training us to view the other side, whoever that is for you, as purely, irredeemably evil? If we are fed a constant diet of outrage that tells us our neighbors are our enemies, are we slowly destroying our own capacity to recognize objective truth?
That is a staggering thought to leave on. The cutting-edge technology of our current era potentially creating the exact same psychological blind spots as the religious biases of the first century. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning what you read, keep questioning your own lenses, and we will catch you on the next one.